Welcome to today's Global Connections program. I'm Bill Miller. Today we're going to look at the Inter-Parliamentary Union and the role it plays in promoting democracy around the world. The Inter-Parliamentary Union, IPU, is one of the oldest institutions providing these services. My guest today is an expert in this area. Ms. Paddy Torsney is the permanent observer to the United Nations on behalf of the IPU. Also, she's a former member of the Canadian Parliament. Paddy, welcome to today's Global Connections program.
Thanks so much, Bill. It's great to be here with you and to see you.
I appreciate you being back again. Thanks. Let's start off with the little overview of the IPU. When was it formed? Why was it formed?
Well, 130 years ago, parliamentarians, as representatives of the people, wanted an opportunity to talk to each other about their common interests. And frankly, around the world, there are more commonalities between people, and they wanted that opportunity to start parliamentary diplomacy. So we now have 178 parliaments, which is a shura, a Knesset, a National Assembly, a Congress. So 178 countries really are part of it. And they are the representatives of we the people. They are the elected or appointed, in some cases, representatives of the people. And we are providing an opportunity for them to get together in meetings and to work on projects together and to find the commonality of the interests of the people and to promote those.
When you mentioned that overview of parliaments, parliamentarians, whatever, there was quite a hodgepodge in it with Knesset, Congress. Is there a sort of a basic definition of what a parliament is?
So it's the national level government. So it's not a state government or a provincial government in my case. It is the national level government, elected body, or the national level representative body of the people.
Exactly. So now how do you involve the parliaments and parliamentarians in your activities?
So we do have a couple of assemblies a year where we bring people together around a main theme and through a series of 4 standing committees. But we also get together and participate at each of the major international meetings. In December of 2018, for instance, there's a meeting on the World Trade Organization. There's a meeting on climate change in Poland. There's a meeting of young parliamentarians taking place in Azerbaijan. There was an e-parliament meeting taking place in Geneva. And so we would have a meeting for the parliamentarians focused on the main issues. And then we do one here in February of each year with the President of the General Assembly's office. So we'll be meeting this year on multilateralism and trying to renew that process and the role of parliamentarians in that. Last year, in 2018, we met around the issue of migration. And again, in December 2018, there'll be the big Marrakesh conference on migration, and we will have a parliamentary meeting right before that to make sure that we're inserting a parliamentary perspective on these issues. Because again, we've talked about this before, but presidents and prime ministers and foreign ministers come to the United Nations, make commitments, sign agreements, but to actually get those implemented, you need to ratify them. You need to pass legislation. You need to appropriate budgets. And that's where the parliamentarians come in, and you need to make sure the governments are fulfilling the commitments they made here at the United Nations.
That's the most important part,
yes.
Right there, to make sure people who say what they're going to do are doing what they said they would do.
Right.
It's very, very critical. Well, those are really important topics, and those are important conferences. Let's flashback to some. What was the most recent one? We think of 2015, the Paris Climate Change Agreement,
right.
And of course there have been what they call COP 24s and
right.
upcoming 25 and that type of thing, follow-up meetings to that. What was your major climate change conference about this past year, and what were some of the recommendations that came out of it?
Well, it's really an opportunity for the parliamentarians to work on the main theme and also to talk about the stumbling blocks or to share best practices or to renew their commitment to the issue or to flag challenges with it. So if you're going to be more successful, you're going to, in implementing any of these things, you're going to think about what the challenges are to the people that you represent. What are the new factors since 2015 that need to be thought about? And so providing that dialogue and that opportunity to renew that energy and to really address any of the stumbling blocks that have arisen since that time.
Exactly. Before I forget, I do want to mention your website, www.ipu.org,
That's right.
and our viewers can go to that to get more information. When we look at the climate situation, every report I've seen, every scientific report is getting more dire.
Yes.
It was dire 4, 5, 8 years ago, but it's getting even worse. The glaciers are melting faster, desertification's taking place. We see that the weather patterns are changing, forest fires are becoming more prevalent.
Oh, certainly in California, you've seen the impact.
Well, Australia and many other places around the world. So do the parliamentarians, and I realize it varies from country to country, but are the majority of them on board and believe that climate change is a major problem and we need to move more aggressively and more quickly?
Well, Bill, part of the challenge with moving more aggressively and more quickly is how to bring the population with you, right? Because you're asking a whole lot of people, every single person, to make some changes into what they're doing in their daily life. So you've seen around the world where governments who start to move progressively on making changes end up getting a whole lot of pushback. In Paris in December 2018, there are and in November, protests, fires, attacks. There's a really big problem as they are trying to make some changes to how they're doing things. They haven't got the people on board. And, you know, it means sometimes expensive changes to people, and you have to figure out a way to mitigate that against all the other pressures. And to help people realize that, yes, it could be more expensive to purchase petrol, but it's really expensive to burn down entire towns. It's expensive, it costs lives. Floods, all of this stuff is a huge cost, and so we're going to pay somewhere along the line. If we don't mitigate the problem, it's a disaster, a global disaster.
And they're predicting it's going to cost us much more in the future to deal with the problem, assuming we can even deal with it. That's the problem. When the glaciers are gone, they're not going to come back.
Well, and what's the price on a human life? I mean, it's quite outrageous what's happening. So things are having to change. So, you know, again, parliamentarians talking about what their citizens are concerned about and sharing ideas for what is working and isn't working and figuring out a way to help them understand the issue so they can also bring their citizenry on side. That's another role for the Member of Parliament. They show leadership both in reflecting what the people want, but also helping the people understand what they need as well.
And of course, another major challenge is to deal with the fossil fuel industry, which is not happy with this at all because they've got $16 trillion of fossil fuels in the ground that they want to sell, and they're going to move it forward. And we see where ExxonMobil and other of these operations have set on scientific studies indicating how detrimental climate change can be. And this goes way back 20, 30 years ago. So there are lots of counterweights.
And others are getting very ahead of the game in alternative sources of energy, whether it's wind or tidal or whatever. So there is some progress being made, but it's uneven.
And Denmark and Costa Rica come to mind on that, and doing a good job serving as a role model for probably the whole world. And we should all be moving in that direction. Well, let's go. We took care of climate change.
And reducing energy consumption in general. I mean, we all can make choices.
Exactly. And we can all do it. We can do that. And the experts say there'll be a little bit of economic dislocation in some areas, but by the same token, you look at the jobs that are being created. It's not coal mine jobs; they're declining because the market is taking care of coal, pushing it out. But you've got in the solar industry in the United States alone, 250,000 jobs created last year.
High-paying, creative jobs.
That's right. Not dangerous. You don't get black lung in a solar plant in all probability.
But again, it's a change, and people are resistant to change. We all are.
We certainly are, yes, most surely. Well, we took care of climate change, as I mentioned. How about migration? We've seen it's just been a tremendous challenge with migrants moving from one area to another, especially from Europe or into Europe, from Africa. We've seen from Central America into the United States and other areas too. What was your conference about?
So interestingly, migration has always been with us and will always be with us. And it's how to better manage the system of migration. And I think one of the biggest understandings that people need is that migration also takes place within continents. So within South America or within Africa, there is great migration. Certainly, we're sitting here in New York. I'm a Canadian. I'm a migrant. My parents came from Ireland. So I see the benefit of migration. And we need to figure out how to make sure it's safe and orderly, and that it provides the benefits and the systems for people, and also that we work. And that's one of the things the IPU has been doing, is to help ensure better governance in the countries where some of the migrants are coming from, to make sure that they can live and aspire to the greatness and the quality of life that they'd wish in their own country as well. So good governance, the rule of law will allow people to have jobs and protect their families in various countries, and that's an important component of what we're doing in terms of our technical cooperation programs to help parliamentarians and to help parliaments work effectively for the people.
It's a very important topic, and we're going to have to deal with it forever. There's no way in the world that we're ever going to solve the problem that quickly.
And we need migrants.
Exactly, right. That's very true. Right. Now, another conference that you had, or conference topic, was the World Trade Organization,
right.
WTO. We don't read much about it, except sometimes on the business page of some of the newspapers.
And yet it affects every part of our life.
Everybody.
Right.
What is the World Trade Organization, and what conclusion did you come to?
Well, I won't give you the full rundown, but it is this system of order that's underway in the world. And we're seeing a great dislocation, again, between what the executive branch of government, the trade ministers and the prime ministers and presidents, and what the people's expectations of those agreements are. And so we need to make sure that we're working for effective trade, that there are, as we're dealing with 193 countries in the world, they're not all part of the WTO, of course, but that we're making sure that it is fair trade, that it is that there is something for everybody in it, and we're not simply establishing rules that benefit the more powerful countries to the detriment of the less powerful countries. And so again, that order and system and making sure that you're reflecting what the people need is important, because ultimately those politicians, the next time they go to the polls, will face the anger or the support of the people for the decisions that have been made.
And this is part of what we call, I guess, the neoliberal order that came out of World War II, and with the establishment of the United Nations and
right.
other international organizations. We're going to come back and talk about that in just a moment. Well, you're watching Global Connections Television, which is a privately funded, independently produced program. The opinions expressed on Global Connections Television are solely those of the moderator and his guest. We'd invite our viewers to go to our website at www.globalconnectionstelevision to see previous programs. Also, if you're involved with a community access television station or a PBS station, or perhaps an educational institution that has an intra-campus television hookup, or you just have a website and you like Global Connections TV shows and would like to share them, please do so. Global Connections is provided free of charge as a public service to help us better understand international issues. Today we're talking with Paddy Torsney, who is with the Inter-Parliamentary Union, and talking about the really important topics that affect not only people in the United States and the economically developed countries, but countries all around the world. Paddy, you were talking about the World Trade Organization. It seems like there's a systemic attack on the organizations that came out of World War II, like the United Nations, the World Trade Organization later. You have various institutions that were set up to try to bring a little bit of order and to try to level the playing field to some degree. Do you see that as in your work with the various parliaments around the world?
Well, there is a rise of populism in many parts of the world. There is a lot of change that people are reacting to, and so in some parts of the world or in some parts of different countries, support for multilateral organization is under attack. And we need to perhaps remind people why it is important to all of us. But again, the organizations have to be working effectively for people and inclusive of people in the processes that they have for decision making. Much like a parliament needs to reflect the people that it is there to represent, and so we work on inclusive, effective parliaments. That includes representation of women and of young people and of various minorities and reflection of the people in a country.
Exactly, and that's absolutely critical, because you cannot marginalize people or certain groups of people, because then you have a very unbalanced situation. You have festering hatred from one group towards another, but people have to be involved, and they're dealing with these common problems like climate change, migration, with creating jobs, providing good education, and so you have to bring everybody in to work on this problem.
And you have to choose. Do you want to focus on what brings us together and finding a way for people to work together, or do you want to continue to divide people? Me, I'm a big, I'm a lover, not a hater, so I want people to find the ways that they can work together for the improvement of all people. And so that's some of the work that we're doing to make those parliaments more effective in the way they represent the people.
You're a uniter, not a divider.
Yeah,
that's
right.
very important.
Yeah.
That brings to mind the UN Sustainable Development Goals. These were adopted in 2015, I guess it was, by all 193 countries at the United Nations. They were an offshoot of the old Millennium Development Goals, but there's 17 logical, practical goals to eliminate poverty by 2050.
Yep. To leave no one behind.
I mean 2030, I'm sorry, 2030.
2030, yeah.
Leave no one behind. To eliminate hunger by 2030. They're very logical goals to help promote
Improve
sustainable
health.
development,
Yeah,
improve health,
sustainable
exactly.
development,
Yes. How do you bring those into what you do? It sounds like everything you do ties into the sustainable development goals.
Sure. First of all, in the development of the goals, we had about 3 years leading up to 15 where we encouraged MPs to participate in the process of developing the goals, to make sure that they were in touch and vibrantly with their executive branches and with their ambassadors who were here negotiating those, and to make sure that they were representing the things that were important. The thing that's interesting is that while we focus on a certain number of goals, certainly 5, which is about gender equality, or 3, which is about health, all the goals are completely interconnected. And where we really come at it is through 16, which is about good, strong institutions, Parliament being one of them. And so we have a toolkit, and we run seminars for members of Parliament, either by a specific Parliament or through our processes, to say, let's look at the issue, let's share best practices. When you're actually implementing a bill or looking at passing a budget in your Congress or in your National Assembly, you need to actually say, are we helping or hurting the goals? Does this make a difference in terms of improving health or detracting from it? Are we enhancing the number of children or people who have education? Are we making sure that we're building more equality, gender equality particularly? So if you look at something like a highway that's going in, or a new highway act, or an infrastructure program, are you making sure that the jobs benefit women as well as men? Are you thinking about what happens when a big population of generally men construction workers arrive in a town? Are you thinking about just building into the processes the inclusion of what women in the town need in terms of what their daily activities are? Are you paying attention to the impact on water? Is sanitation taken care of? Are you going to actually make it a sustainable road or bridge or whatever to make sure that it's only built once and it doesn't have a detrimental impact on farming, for instance? So it's about connecting all the dots and saying, is this good for the environment in general? Does it help with climate change or not? All of that stuff is included in the goals when you look at them in an interconnected manner. And so each year, as you know, different countries have what's called the Voluntary National Reports here at the High Level Political Forum in July. And we provide an opportunity for the 100 or so members of Parliament that come with their ministers where they are making those reports to educate themselves on the main issues and to make sure that they're sharing best practices again and saying, you're doing that in the United States, we could do that here, or wow, that's a great idea for making sure that we're paying attention in budgeting, for instance.
It's certainly very helpful to analyze what's going on in your country and to share that information with people who have a very direct interest in it, obviously. But you're absolutely right as far as you're taking a more holistic approach. And it's not just the gross domestic product. We use that indicator for years and years, saying, well, if it creates jobs, if it bumps up the GDP, it's got to be good. That's not true.
No.
That is simply not the case. In fact, you could help create jobs perhaps for example, we can create more jobs with the fossil fuel industry, and it's going to be very much more detrimental to the planet. You could help create jobs with the solar and wind and other alternative energy forms, and it's certainly going to be much better for the planet and for the whole society.
Well, and the GDP doesn't count all the unpaid work, right? That is a big problem, and most of the unpaid work in most countries is done by women. And so if you're creating more unpaid work, collecting water or firewood or something, then that has an impact on a certain part of the population. So you need to be paying attention to more than just the GDP. It's a big problem.
It is. It certainly is. We were talking about trends that have been developing, and climate change is one that just, it should be on the front page of every newspaper every day. People will get sick.
For the connections between what we're reading about those fires and floods and
right.
poor crops.
A to Z, this is how we connect it. But these issues are so important, and they're issues that we just don't read enough about.
Right.
And this is one thing that your organization is certainly focusing on. One that has gotten much more publicity, I think, today than it did 4 or 5 years ago, is violence against women.
Yep.
This is something, it seems like, I don't know if it's because there's more coverage of it, that more women are reporting it, or if the societal mores and folkways are changing, the values are changing, that people don't view it the way they did 30, 40 years ago. How do you deal with that issue?
Well, the specific, of course, we care about legislation, and part of gender equality is making sure, of course, that everybody is safe and able to participate in society fully, and that's in everybody's interest. But it's also that we are very concerned about the recent work that we did around violence against women MPs, particularly. You got to figure, members of parliament have some of the highest status in their country. They are the people who have a privileged position in many ways. And yet what we found was that a significant number of women all across the world were actually subjected to violence by the very fact, or harassment, by the very fact that they were in positions of power, often from their own caucus members, so from the same party. Certainly women who spoke up around human rights or around women's rights, women who were in the opposition parties versus in the governing party, or women who were from minorities faced threats, attacks, physical violence, sexism. And once we did that study, we then said, okay, now everyone has to learn to address this, because getting the fact and the data on what was happening was really important. And now we're doing regional surveys. We just completed one with with PACE, with the European Council in Europe, and drill down, including staff members, to figure out what's going on there. And is it about change and sharing power? And I'll show you, you won't be sharing power with me, or what's happening. But if we name it, if we call it out, if we show people what's happening, then you're able to address it. And so not only are we telling people what's going on, but we're also saying, here are some solutions. And it's the bullying stuff, it's the stuff to make a more conducive parliament, to making sure that you're getting the best answers, and also that those women who are representatives of the people are able to do their job.
Exactly. Well, in the last minute we have, hardest question of the whole thing. As you look over the horizon, what do you see as the major challenge to the parliaments and all of us around the world? Of course, climate change is up there. Perhaps the lack of will and wallet to fund programs properly, but is there one other problem that's out there looming that we really need to focus on?
Sure. I think that making sure our parliaments are inclusive, and that we have people who want to be in the parliament and represent people, because it's an important job, and that we show the respect. So we have a dearth of young people in parliament, and we need to address that, because they are representatives of the people. And then this situation where women aren't able to fully participate. And I think part of that is actually how we discuss things. So if I came on here and said, Bill, you're stupid and that's a bad idea, that's not going to make you want to invite me back again. But we do create a situation where people argue in an inappropriate way, where they attack the person instead of their ideas, where we comment on hair and makeup and dress instead of on what the people are talking about. So when I'm talking to school groups, I particularly say, disagree with the ideas, be the person that says, stop attacking her, comment on her ideas, and then we can have a really good discussion. And we need to create that space for people to talk about issues and to be able to discuss things, and to empower their members of parliament to create a space for discussion and working on solutions.
Yes, there certainly has been a debasement of civility in political discourse. There's
all
no
around
doubt
the world.
All around the world. It's happening every day.
Yeah.
But it's delightful to see that you folks are working on this. I know you're working in conjunction with the United Nations agencies and with many other groups to put the spotlight on these problems and hopefully to develop remedies, recommendations, suggestions, plans, proposals to eliminate them or at least curtail them and reduce them. But Paddy Torsney, I want to thank you so very much for bringing us up to date on what the Inter-Parliamentary Union is doing. And thank you for a very interesting and a very informative program.
Thanks so much. And I hope people do go to our website and get a copy of our publications and see some of the work we're doing.
IPU.org.
Perfect.
Okay. I'm Bill Miller. Thank you for joining us today on Global Connections Television.